What is white privilege? In short, white privilege is a buzz concept, a fad idea, that allows 19-year-old aristocrats feel better about being from a moderate to high socio-economic status. It is the product of pseudo-educated liberal guilt. Its proponents are white, well-off liberals who are educated enough to see the plight of poor minorities and empathetic enough to feel bad for it. These are not bad things. Quite the contrary. But, asserting to an entire subset of a population that their individual successes are due to a special privilege based on their ethnicity and not their own endeavors is not enlightened thinking. It is racist. Racism is a serious problem. The concept of white privilege serves only to exacerbate the problem. White privilege is the belief that this man has more privilege than this man.
White privilege means that these men must share a holiday, while this man has his own.
To tell a welder that his livelihood, his house, his car, everything he has literally sweated for, is due not to his skill and hard work, but because of his skin color, is racist. Espousing white privilege can only result in two things. It masks the racism in some people and inflames racism in others. Racism is a serious problem, but it is often misunderstood and blamed for things better explained when viewed in another context. Racism is a subset of tribalism. Humans are tribalistic by nature. We consciously and subconsciously divide ourselves into subgroups. These subgroups are based in skin color, community boundary, national borders, extended kinship, social class, mythological belief system, even by which school one attends. Even sports teams are an aspect of tribalism. The us versus them tribalistic mentality may have served humanity in the past. It protected one village from another, one kingdom from another. Technology has globalized the species. The world is now our village. Now, the us versus them mentality is a liability to the species, and no longer an asset. Racism is the pinnacle of tribalism and contrary to this integration. Thus it is an impediment to the human species. Racism is such an injustice because it is needlessly and unfairly divisive within a community. In doing so, racism hinders the development of the human species as a whole. I postulate that anything that retards the development of the species is bad. And anything that advances the human species as a whole is good. If the white privilege hypothesis is false, then what would we see in our society that would show how it is false? We would see at least one ethnic minority which, as a group, does better than whites. A group that is discriminated against, yet enjoys success equal or greater than whites as a whole. There would be fewer of that group in prison, and more in prestigious jobs like doctors, professors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs. There are two such groups in America: East Asians and Jews. Why? First and second generation East Asians come from a cultural identity heavily steeped in Confucianism, which extols pragmatism, lawfulness, hard work, and education. Hebrew culture also emphasizes these traits. These traits aren't just seen as a good idea, or a means to monetary success. They are a part of the person's moral values. How could they not succeed? Do all East Asians and Jews have these values? Do they all stay out of jail and succeed in life? Of course not. But as a group, they do. White privilege is also intellectually dishonest. It asserts that if members of the white group criticize the white privilege hypothesis, then they are either 1. Ignorant and in need of indoctrination. 2. That the person is racist. White privilege is an idea. It is a hypothesis, not a fact. All ideas must be challenged. Those that withstand the challenge are worthy of acceptance only until a more worthy idea replaces it. The you're ignorant or racist view stops any criticism of white privilege as an idea. Any questioning of the idea means that the questioner just don't get it. Until they do. Then, any further questioning makes them a racist. But only if they are white. This is racist.
White privilege is unnoticed by those who have it, but is apparent to those who don't. If you cannot see it, it is because you have it. At this point, the white privilege proponent is assuming that people are bigots if they do not acknowledge that they are bigots. This is a classic case of begging the question, or circular reasoning.
The white privilege hypothesis is also a divisive force, which is the opposite of what its proponents intend. Instead of placing blame on accident of birth, forcing people to prove their innocence, while exonerating others for their actions, focus of merging the tribes, let boundaries of nations, mythic creeds, ancestry, and sports teams become celebrated quirks of the individual that make us all more interesting, and work on improving and cherishing the largest tribe of all, humanity. The biggest indicator of success in life, be it in business, education, or personal fulfillment, is socioeconomic status. In other words, how much wealth you have. But money can't buy happiness. No, but it can pay off a lot of misery. And it can buy power. Political power to be wielded to subjugate others. Or to free others. The socio-economic status of a person is often more of a factor of how others view that person than gender or race. Racism is often a red herring in inequality studies. Before the protests of how minorities are doing worse in some areas. I am not disputing that racism exists, nor that it is a problem. But that when socio-economic status is taken into account, many of the problems diminish in size. I assert that before racism can be eliminated, the gap between the social classes must be diminished if not closed. White privilege is not an institutional matter, as its proponents claim, but rather one of people. Jim Crow laws were institutional. The law of the land gave privilege to whites only. Those laws no longer exist. In fact, services like welfare and school grants are easier for minorities to get. Other services, like scholarships, are exclusive to all but members of certain minorities. If a Hmong-only scholarship is created, no one says a word. If a white-only scholarship is created, then it is racist. But racism still does exist in both the job market and in the criminal justice system. Proponents of white privilege point out that it is easier for a white man to get a job than a black man. How can this assertion be tested? One manner that would contain all variables save for one, the test variable, and thus be scientifically valid, would be to submit identical resumes where only the first name is changed. For resume A, let the name be John. For resume B, let the name be Tyrone. The resume's acceptance for interview would be weighed. According to the white privilege hypothesis, John's resume would be picked over Tyrone's most of the time. So far so good? Not quite. The obvious flaw here is that the boss's race is not taken into account. If the boss is white, then would picking John be a matter of white privilege, or personal racism, or that Johnny's resume happened to be higher in the stack? If the boss is non-white and non-black, then would picking Johnny's name and not Tyrone Ellis be a matter of white privilege or personal racism, or because John was higher in the stack? What if the boss was black? If a black boss picked Tyrone's resume over Johnny's, then is that a case for black privilege? The criminal justice system in America is broken. Even if past crimes are accounted for, blacks face stiffer penalties than whites. This is disgusting, unjust, and immoral. Unfortunately for the proponents of the white privilege hypothesis, this one sliver of evidence does not prove the totality of their claims. Consider this. If there is such a thing as white privilege in the courts, then one has to accept women's privilege in the courts as well. Despite race, women receive lighter sentences for the same crimes that men commit. This includes instances where the woman was the mastermind behind the crime. The white privilege hypothesis is even taught in schools as a fact. This perpetuates guilt for being born with a certain skin color, and hatred for others born with that color. This is a divisive force, not a unifying force. There are already theories that explain the disparities between the various groups, be they by social class, race or gender. White privilege is another layer that needs explaining that adds nothing to the discussion. When faced with competing explanations for a phenomenon, the simpler one is often the correct one. Thus the white privilege hypothesis can be rejected in favor of simpler explanations. In short, if you want to end, or at least minimize, racism, 1. Minimize socio-economic disparity. 2. Challenge ideas that promote divisiveness. Ideas like nationalism, Nazism, bigotry, fascism, the white privilege hypothesis.